She had a notebook. It was small and brown and held together with a rubber band that had lost most of its stretch, and she carried it in the front pocket of her backpack the way other girls carried lip gloss or hair ties. She wrote things down. Not feelings, not stories, not the kind of things her classmates scribbled in journals with glittery covers and tiny locks. Wren Fielding wrote down what she saw. The blue sedan that parked outside the hardware store every Tuesday at exactly 3:17. The way the crossing guard on Fifth Street always touched the brim of his hat before he stepped off the curb. The pattern the starlings made above the school parking lot in the late afternoon, the shape of them shifting like a single breathing thing against the gray October sky. Her mother had done that. Her mother had written things down. Wren did not remember this firsthand. She had been 3 when Laura Fielding died, too young to hold a memory that precise. But Cade had told her more than once, in the particular quiet voice he used when he was talking about Laura, without meaning to talk about her for very long. Your mother noticed everything. She was a reporter, the best kind, the kind that sees what other people walk past. And so Wren noticed things. It was the closest she could get to a woman she'd never really known, and she held on with the way she held on to the cracked pink phone in her backpack, with her father's number taped inside the case, with both hands, with the understanding that some things mattered more than they appeared to. The man appeared on a Monday. He was sitting on the green bench across from Jefferson Elementary when Wren arrived at school, which was notable for 2 reasons. First, the bench had been empty every morning for the entire year she'd been at the school. It faced the playground with a direct line of sight through the chain-link fence, and it sat in a stretch of sidewalk that had no particular reason to attract anyone unless they were waiting for a child or watching one. Second, he was holding a coffee cup that he never drank from. Wren noticed both things. She wrote them down during first period under the date in her small, neat handwriting. Man on green bench, khaki jacket, white coffee cup, does not drink. She looked up from the notebook and out the classroom window. From her seat in Mrs. Callahan's 4th grade class, she could see the bench clearly. He was still there. His posture hadn't changed. His eyes were fixed on the playground where the 2nd graders had morning recess, and they moved across the space with a slow mechanical sweep that reminded Wren of the security cameras at the grocery store on Route 44. Back and forth, no expression, no blinking. She closed the notebook and put it away and did not think about him again until the next morning. Tuesday. Same bench, same man, same jacket, same coffee cup, same careful stillness. This time Wren watched him from the side gate while she waited for the bell, and she saw something that made the small hairs on the back of her neck stand up in a way she did not understand, but trusted completely. He waved. A 2nd grade girl was standing near the fence, close enough to touch the chain links, bouncing a red ball against the asphalt in the absent-minded way that small children play when they are waiting for something else to happen. The man leaned forward on the bench just slightly and raised one hand, a small wave. Friendly, the kind of wave a grandfather might give, or a neighbor, or anyone who meant nothing by it at all. The girl waved back, and the man smiled, but the smile stopped at his mouth. His eyes stayed exactly the same, flat and sweeping and counting, and Wren felt the wrongness of that smile land in her stomach like a stone dropped into still water. She wrote it down. Day 2, same man, waved at a 2nd grade girl near the fence. She waved back. His smile is wrong. His eyes don't match his mouth. She did not know what to do with the information. She considered telling Mrs. Callahan, but Mrs. Callahan was the kind of teacher who would pat her on the shoulder and say something about being careful with assumptions. She considered telling Principal Eddington, but Eddington was the kind of man who would want meetings and procedures in the right form filled out in triplicate before he acknowledged that the weather was happening. She considered telling the crossing guard, Mr. Polk, but Mr. Polk was 73 and had trouble remembering which children went to which school. She went home that afternoon and sat in the kitchen and looked at the pink phone and thought about calling her father. But what would she say? There's a man on a bench. He smiled wrong. She put the phone away and did her homework and went to bed and dreamed about nothing she could remember. Wednesday, day 3. He was there again. Same bench, same coffee cup, same stillness. The October morning was gray and cold, and the bench was wet from overnight dew, and the man was sitting on it as though he'd never left, as though he had grown there overnight, like something that belonged to the landscape. His eyes moved across the playground in their mechanical sweep, and Wren stood at the corner of the laundromat half a block away and watched him for 4 full minutes before she made her decision. She set her backpack on the ground and took out the phone. The phone was old and cracked, a hand-me-down from her father's collection of devices that had survived various drops and collisions, and one memorable incident involving a gas station parking lot and a boot. He had taped his number inside the case with a piece of white medical tape and written it in black marker in the blocky capital letters that were the only kind of handwriting he seemed capable of. She dialed. It rang twice. "Dad," she said, "there's a man outside my school. He's been watching the playground for 3 days. I'm scared." The line went silent, not the silence of disconnection, the silence of a man who was already moving. Then she heard the motorcycle start. "Where are you right now?" "Around the corner from the front gate. He can't see me." "Stay exactly there. Don't move." She heard the garage door, the engine climbing through its gears, wind against the phone's microphone. "Keep the phone in your hand," he said. "Stay on the line." She pressed her back flat against the brick wall of the laundromat and held the pink phone against her chest and waited. Cade Fielding had been awake since 5. That wasn't unusual. He'd spent 15 years riding with the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club, and somewhere along the way his body had decided that sleeping past dawn was a luxury he no longer needed or deserved. He was in the garage when the call came in, crouched beside his Road King, with a socket wrench in one hand and a cold cup of coffee on the concrete floor next to him, working on the transmission case with the focused attention of a man who found mechanical problems more solvable than most other kinds. The phone rang. He saw Wren's name on the screen and his hand stopped moving before his mind caught up to why. She had the phone for emergencies. She had never used it. He picked up immediately. And then she said the words, and something in his chest locked into a position he recognized from a long time ago. From a different kind of life, the cold geometric click of a situation resolving itself into a set of actions that needed to happen in a specific order without delay or hesitation. He was through the garage door before she finished speaking. He made 2 calls before he reached the end of his street. The first was to Boone, and it lasted 4 sentences. "Man outside Jefferson Elementary. Been there 3 days watching the kids. Bring whoever's available." Boone said, "How many of all of them?" Cade said. The second call was to the school. He rode hard. Duschen. The Road King opened up on the straightaway past the railroad tracks, and he leaned into it the way he'd leaned into 1,000 rides before. But this one was different in a way that lived in his hands rather than his head. A tremor that had nothing to do with the vibration of the engine and everything to do with the sound of his daughter's voice saying 3 words he would hear in his sleep for months afterward. "I'm scared." Wren Fielding was not a girl who scared easily. She had been riding on the back of a motorcycle since she was 6 years old. She had held a snake at the county fair when every other child her age had backed away. She had walked into her first day at Jefferson Elementary, knowing nobody, and come home that afternoon having made no friends and expressed no distress about it whatsoever. She had, at age 7, found a dead raccoon behind the garage, and instead of screaming or crying, had examined it for several minutes and then come inside and asked Cade what kind of parasites raccoons carried, because she wanted to know if the dog next door was at risk. She did not scare. She observed. She assessed. She asked questions. And the fact that she had used the word scared on the phone deliberately and without qualification told Cade something he would have preferred not to know, that whatever she had seen outside that school had been assessed and found to be genuinely threatening by a girl whose threat assessment was better than most adults. "I'm scared." The road opened up ahead of him, 2 lanes of blacktop running straight through the flat land between his neighborhood and the school district, the landscape of his everyday life made strange by velocity and fear. A gas station, a feed store, the barber shop where he'd taken Wren for her first haircut, though she'd been too young to remember it, and he had never told her about the way she'd laughed when the barber buzzed the trimmer near her ear. The ordinary landmarks of a father's life passing on both sides at 60 miles an hour, and none of them meant anything right now, except as distance between himself and his daughter. He came around the corner of DeMaplewood doing 20 over the limit, slowed without stopping, and read the street in 3 seconds. The way a man reads a street when he has spent enough years on one to know what belongs and what doesn't. Green bench south side, direct sight line to the playground. Empty. A black SUV parked 3 spaces down. Tinted windows, engine off, California plates. He clocked the number. 4 letters and 3 numbers. He repeated it in his head until it held a string of characters that had just become the most important piece of information in his world and kept moving. He went around the block and came back on foot. 2 minutes, maybe 3. Wren was still at the corner exactly where he'd told her to stay back flat against the brick wall with the pink phone pressed against her chest. Her platinum blonde hair was loose around her shoulders, and she was wearing her bright red t-shirt, the one she'd had since last spring, the one that was getting too small but that she refused to give up because Laura had bought it for her before she died, though Wren didn't know that and Kate had never told her. She looked small against the brick. Something in her face loosened just slightly when she saw him. Not all the way, just enough to let him know that she had been holding something in place by force of will and that the force was no longer necessary. He didn't say anything. He put his hand briefly on top of her head and she pressed into it for just a second before straightening back up. They had a language for moments like this. It was mostly physical and mostly silent, and it had developed over 7 years of being the only 2 people in a house that sometimes felt too big for them. "Is he still there?" Kate asked. "I haven't looked. You told me not to move." "Good girl." He glanced toward the corner. The SUV hadn't moved. "Tell me everything." She told him. 3 days, same bench, same coffee cup, same stillness. The way his eyes swept the playground without expression, without blinking, like he was counting something or cataloging it for later use. The second-grade girl he'd waved at through the fence on Tuesday. The smile that never reached his eyes. Cade listened without interrupting. He'd learned a long time ago that Wren's observations were more reliable than most adults, and that interrupting her was a way of telling her that what she'd seen didn't matter, which was a lie he would never tell her. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Did he ever look at you specifically?" "Yes, but he'd look away fast, like he didn't want me to catch him." "Did you catch him?" She met his eyes steadily. "Every time." He nodded once. "Come on." He took her in through the side entrance and found Principal Eddington waiting in the hallway outside the main office. Eddington was a measured man, the kind who chose his words the way a chess player chose his moves carefully and with an awareness that each one committed him to a sequence of consequences. He wore pressed shirts and polished shoes, and he looked at Cade the way people often did on first encounter. The cut, the patches, the iron wolf stitched across the back, the road captain, tab, and his expression moved through several stages before settling on something careful and professional. "Mr. Fielding." Black SUV, tinted windows parked on Maplewood. Cade recited the plate number from memory. "He's been here 3 days watching your playground. Call the police." Eddington glanced down at the notepad where he'd written the plate, then at Wren, then back at Cade. "I want to handle this carefully. If we escalate without a confirmed—" "Call them," Cade said. The way he said it left no room for chess. Eddington called. The officers arrived in 18 minutes. Brannigan was the lead, a broad man in his late 40s with the weathered look of someone who had been doing the job long enough to have stopped being surprised by most things, but not quite long enough to have stopped being angry about some of them. The younger one was named Cole, and he stood slightly behind Brannigan with the careful posture of a man who was still learning which parts of the bond required speaking and which required listening. They spoke with Eddington, then with Cade, then with Wren. Brannigan asked Wren the same questions Cade had asked, and Wren gave the same answers in the same order, with the same steady precision, and Cade watched Brannigan's face change as he listened. Not dramatically, just a small tightening around the eyes, the look of a man who was hearing something he recognized. Then they walked outside to look at the bench. Empty. The SUV was gone. Cade had expected that. He'd pulled up on a motorcycle in an Iron Wolf's cut. Anyone watching would have seen him coming from 2 blocks away, and anyone with a reason to be invisible would have made the correct calculation and left. "He made you when you arrived," Brannigan said. "Probably. Run the plate." Brannigan ran it. The response came back in 11 minutes, and the 11 minutes were the longest Cade had spent standing still in recent memory. Vernon Phelps, 49, Red Bluff, California, 40 minutes north on Interstate 5. No active warrants, 1 prior contact. And then Brannigan said the thing that changed everything. 1 prior contact. School parking lot, Tehama County, 4 years ago. A mother filed a complaint. said she'd seen him watching her daughter's school 3 days in a row. The complaint was investigated and closed. Insufficient evidence of criminal activity. Brannigan paused. His voice didn't change, but his eyes did. 6 months after that complaint was closed, a 7-year-old girl from the same school district was reported missing. Abigail Torrance. The case is still open. The name landed in the hallway like a physical thing. Cade felt it in his hands. He looked at Wren and saw that she had heard it too, and that she understood what it meant, and that the understanding was doing something to her face that he wished he could stop, but couldn't. A missing girl, 7 years old. From the last school where this man had sat on a bench and watched and waited. Without a direct incident, Brannigan said, and his voice had the careful tone of a man who was saying what he was required to say rather than what he wanted to say. The complaint here remains a complaint, but I'm filing it and I'm flagging it in connection with the Torrance case. Send a car past this school, Cade said, every day for the rest of the month. I can do a week. Do what you can. It wasn't enough. They both knew it. Wren was in the hallway when Cade came back from walking Brannigan to the door. She was sitting in one of the plastic chairs outside the office with her backpack on her lap and her white sneakers pressed flat on the linoleum. The notebook was open on her knee. She had written something while he was gone. She looked up when she heard him. The girl, she said, Abigail Torrance. Yeah. She was 7. Yeah. Wren closed the notebook. Her hands were steady, but her jaw was set in a way that reminded Cade so powerfully of Laura that for a moment the hallway seemed to tilt. I need you to think carefully, he said. He crouched down in front of her. Have you ever seen that SUV anywhere besides school? Near the house, near the bus stop? She hesitated. Half a second. He caught it. Wren, there's a black SUV that parks on Crestwood sometimes, she said slowly. Near the bus stop, I thought it was just someone who lived on the street. She paused. How many times have I walked past it? He stood up without answering. Let's go. She rode behind him on the Road King with her arms around his waist, chin tucked down the way she always rode. She'd been riding with him since she was 6, and she knew not to talk when he was navigating traffic. She waited until they turned onto Crestwood, then she said quietly right against his ear, "That's his car." Cade looked. The black SUV sat at the far end of the street, engine off, windows dark, 30 meters from the bus stop where Wren had stood every single morning for 2 years, 30 meters from the spot where she set down her backpack and waited for the number 7 bus with her pink phone in her pocket and her notebook in her hand, not knowing that behind those tinted windows, someone was watching. Cataloging, planning. The light ahead turned green. He didn't move. The car behind him honked once, then again. He pulled forward slowly, eyes fixed on the SUV, until the angle took it from his sight. He rode the rest of the way home in silence. His jaw was set and his mind was already working through what came next, what needed to happen, and what he was going to have to do before Vernon Phelps got any closer to his daughter. He pulled into the driveway, helped Wren off the bike, looked at her. Inside, he said, lock the door. You don't open it for anyone but me. She looked toward the end of the street, then back at him. What are you going to do? Make some calls. She held his gaze for one long second. Then she went inside. The deadbolt turned with a sound he felt more than heard. He pulled out his phone and called Boone. How many can you get to my place in an hour? 8, maybe 10. Do it, Cade said. Now. They came at dusk. Cade heard them before he saw them. The low rolling thunder of 8 motorcycles turning onto a street in formation, headlights cutting through the fading light like a procession of something ancient and intentional. He was on the porch when they pulled in, standing with his arms crossed and a cup of cold coffee in one hand, watching the streets settle into the particular quality of silence that arrived when 8 members of the Iron Wolves pulled into a residential neighborhood at the end of day. The neighbors found reasons to be elsewhere. He didn't blame them. Boone came up the steps first. He was a big man, broader than Cade, with a gray beard that had been growing since before Wren was born, and hands that looked like they'd been designed for a larger species entirely. He looked at the slip of paper on the porch railing where Cade had written the plate number and the name Vernon Phelps in his blocky capitals, and then he looked at Cade. That him? That's him. Behind Boone, the others filed onto the porch and into the front yard. Colton, 26, the youngest, still carrying the particular alertness of a man who hadn't yet learned to conserve his energy for the moments that required it. Silas, who had been riding longer than Cade and spoke less than anyone in the club, which was saying something. Nate, who had a daughter of his own and whose face had gone very still when Boone had made the call. And four others whose road names Cade knew better than their given ones. Men who had answered the call without asking what it was about because the call itself was the information they needed. They moved without hurry. The way men moved when they understood the situation was serious, but not yet urgent, filling the available space with a quiet that had weight to it. Someone leaned against the porch post. Someone else crouched on the top step. Nobody spoke while they were still settling. The street was very still. A kid on a bicycle turned the corner at the far end, saw the row of motorcycles lining the curb, and turned around without slowing down. Colton noticed. "Are we that intimidating?" "Yes," Cade said. Colton nodded, satisfied. Cade looked at the eight of them. Road-worn, leather-cut, the kind of men who had spent enough years in difficult situations that difficult situations no longer changed their resting expression. And he felt something loosen slightly in his chest that had been wound tight since Wren's call that morning. "What do we know?" Boone said. "Name's Vernon Phelps, 49. Lives in Red Bluff, 40 minutes north." Cade set down his coffee. "One prior contact, school, parking lot, Tehama County, 4 years ago. Complaint filed. Never went anywhere." He paused. 6 months after that complaint was dropped, a 7-year-old girl named Abigail Torrance went missing from the same school district. Case is still open. The silence that followed had a texture to it. Not shock. These weren't men who were shocked easily, but something harder and colder than that. "He's been outside Jefferson Elementary for 3 days. And yesterday he was parked 30 meters from Wren's bus stop." Nobody spoke for a moment. Cade had known most of them for over a decade. He knew what their quiet meant. "What do you need?" Nate said. His voice was flat and careful in the way of a man who was holding something down. Nate had a daughter. Her name was Grace. She was 8. Cade had seen him hold her on his shoulders at the 4th of July fireworks last summer, her small hands wrapped around his forehead, her laughter carrying across the crowd. Nate understood this situation in a way that went beyond loyalty or brotherhood. He understood it in the place where a father kept the things he would do and the things he would become if someone threatened his child. "Eyes on Red Bluff," Cade said. "I want to know where he goes when he moves and whether he comes back south." He looked at Boone. "And I want someone at Wren's school tomorrow morning before the bell." Boone nodded. "Done." "Colton, you're on the street tonight. End of the block. Engine off. He comes within 2 blocks of this house, I want to know." Colton was already pulling out his keys. "Copy." "Nate Silas, you're heading north after midnight. I want eyes on his address by 1 a.m. He gave them the Red Bluff Street from the police report, the one Brannigan had read off without quite meaning to. "Don't approach. Don't make contact. Just watch." Nate and Silas exchanged a brief look. The wordless communication of 2 men who had ridden together long enough to have entire conversations in a glance. They nodded. "The rest of you," Cade said, "go home. Get some sleep. I'll call if I need you." Nobody argued. Nobody asked questions. They filed back off the porch the way they had arrived, unhurried, deliberate, and one by one the motorcycles started up and moved out until only Colton's bike remained at the end of the street, parked under the oak tree, with the engine off and the rider sitting still as a post. Boone was the last one off the porch. He stopped at the top step and looked at Cade. "Is she okay?" "She's inside." "That's not what I asked." Cade was quiet for a moment. "She will be." Boone looked at him for a second longer, then nodded once and went down the steps. Wren was in the kitchen when Cade came inside. She was sitting at the table with a glass of water and her homework open in front of her, though she hadn't written anything on the page. The notebook sat beside her, textbook closed, and Cade noticed that she'd placed it within arm's reach, the way another child might keep a stuffed animal close during a storm. She looked up when he came in. "How many are out there?" 8. She looked at the window toward the sound of low voices still fading on the street. "Are they staying, some of them?" He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Have you eaten anything?" She shook her head. He got up and made her a sandwich, ham and cheese, the way she'd liked it since she was 5, and put it in front of her without ceremony. She picked it up and took a small bite more out of obedience than hunger. Dad, yeah, what if he comes back tonight? Cade looked at her steadily. He won't. How do you know? Because Colton is going to be parked at the end of this street until morning. He held her gaze. And because Vernon Phelps is a coward. Cowards don't move when they know they've been seen. She thought about that. The way she thought about everything from the beginning to the end, not skipping steps. He doesn't know how many of you there are. No, Kate said, he doesn't. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite relief, but the particular calm of a child who has run the numbers and found them satisfactory. She took another bite of the sandwich. Okay, she said. Red Bluff was a small city an hour north of Reading on Interstate 5, the kind of place that appeared and disappeared in a traveler's rearview mirror without leaving much impression. Nate and Silas rode up after midnight and found Vernon Phelps's address without difficulty. A single-story rental on a quiet street near the edge of town, the kind of house that suggested a man who didn't want neighbors paying attention to him. No decorations, no personal touches visible through the uncurtained windows. The kind of emptiness that was itself a statement. The black SUV was in the driveway. Nate called Cade at 1:14 a.m. He's home. Lights have been out since we got here. Stay on him, Cade said. He moves I want to know before he hits the highway. Copy. And then Nate said the thing that Cade had not expected, and that changed the shape of what they were dealing with. Cade, there's been traffic at this house. What kind of traffic? 3 vehicles since we've been here. None of them stayed more than 10 minutes. A pickup truck, a gray sedan, and a van with no plates. They came, they went inside, they left. Cade was standing in his bedroom in the dark, and the darkness seemed to thicken around him. He's not alone in this. No, Nate said. He's not. Cade hung up and sat in the chair by the window and watched the street. He did not sleep. He sat and thought about Vernon Phelps and the visitors at his house in the middle of the night, and the 7-year-old girl named Abigail Torrance who had vanished from the same school district where a complaint about the same man had been filed and forgotten. He thought about Wren at the laundromat wall, pink phone pressed to her chest, waiting for him, trusting that the call would be enough. He thought about the notebook in her backpack, the small, neat handwriting. His smile is wrong. His eyes don't match his mouth. 10 years old, and she had seen what adults had missed. She had watched and waited and documented, and then when the information reached a threshold she couldn't handle alone, she had called the one number she trusted. He thought about Laura, about the way she used to sit at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, surrounded by notebooks and printed records and highlighted documents, chasing a story that wouldn't let her sleep. Laura had been a reporter for the Reading Standard before the car accident, a local journalist who covered county government and school boards, and the kind of small-town stories that nobody read until they suddenly mattered. She had been good at it, not because she was loud or aggressive or any of the things people expected from reporters, because she noticed, because she wrote things down, because she understood that the truth was usually sitting in plain sight, waiting for someone to look at it carefully enough to see it for what it was. Wren had never known her mother as a reporter. She had never seen Laura sitting at that table. She had never watched Laura pull a notebook from her bag and write down something she'd observed with the precise, unhurried hand of a woman who believed that documentation was a form of courage. But she was doing it anyway, without instruction, without memory. She was doing it because it was in her, the same way the platinum blonde hair was in her, and the steady gaze was in her, and the stubborn, unshakable belief that seeing something clearly was the beginning of making it right. Cade sat by the window and watched the dark street and felt the weight of that inheritance settle around his daughter like armor she didn't yet know she was wearing. At some point, the sky outside began to lighten at its edges. He hadn't noticed the hours passing. Morning came gray and cold, the kind of October morning that arrived with a low ceiling of cloud and the smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet. Cade was up at 4:30, dressed and on the porch with fresh coffee by 5, watching Colton's bike at the end of the street. Nothing had moved overnight. The street was just a street doing what streets did in the early hours before the neighborhood woke up. Street lights clicking off one by one as the gray light took over. He woke Wren at 7. She came downstairs in her bright red t-shirt and black pants with white sneakers in one hand and her hair loose and uncombed, and stopped when she saw Boone sitting at the kitchen table with a mug. "Morning," Boone said. Wren looked at Cade. "He's riding with us," Cade said. She sat down and ate breakfast without asking further questions, which told Cade everything he needed to know about how she was really doing. Wren always asked questions. The silence meant she was conserving something, saving it, holding it in reserve the way she held everything in reserve carefully and deliberately, and with a plan she hadn't shared yet. She picked up her notebook from the counter where she'd left it the night before and slipped it into her backpack. They rode to school 3 up, Cade and Wren on the Road King, Boone on his soft tail just behind his broad frame, making the bike look like a toy beneath him. They parked across the street and Cade walked Wren to the side gate and stood there until she was through the door and the door had closed behind her. He stood at the fence for a moment, looking at the green bench. Empty. It had been empty when they arrived, and it stayed empty through the 10 minutes he stood there. No black SUV on the street, no khaki jacket, no coffee cup that no one ever drank from. Boone came up beside him. Maybe he got the message. Maybe, Cade said. He didn't believe it. Nate called at 9:47 a.m. He left Red Bluff 40 minutes ago, heading south on 5. Cade was already moving toward his bike. "Keep the distance. Don't let him see you." He called Boone. "He's on his way." Boone was still outside the school. "How long, Ma?" 30 minutes, maybe less. "I'll stay on the gate." Cade rode to the intersection of 5th and Maplewood, parked where he had a clear line of sight to the school entrance, the bench, and the full length of the street in both directions. He sat on his bike and waited, engine off, watching. The way he had watched 100 roads in 100 towns, over 15 years of riding, reading the traffic and the parked cars and the pedestrians and the particular quality of attention that a street gave off when someone on it was trying very hard not to be noticed. The bench stayed empty. The street stayed quiet. The minutes moved like something heavy being dragged across concrete. At 10:23, the black SUV turned onto Maplewood. It slowed as it approached the school. Cade watched it from across the intersection. The dark windows. The slight hesitation in its speed as it passed the green bench. The way a man slows when he is checking something without wanting to appear to be checking it. It didn't stop. It kept moving slow and deliberate, and then it turned the corner and was gone. Cade counted to 10. Then he called Nate. "Where is he?" Circling, he went around the block. "How many times?" That was the first. Cade started his engine. Vernon Phelps came around a second time at 10:31. This time he stopped. Not at the bench. He was smarter than that now. Half a block further, down in a stretch of unrestricted parking, with a partial view of the school gate. Engine off, windows up. Cade rode up behind him and stopped 10 feet back. He didn't get off his bike immediately. He sat there for a moment, letting the sound of the Road King's engine reach the SUV before he killed it, letting the silence after it do its work. Then he got off and walked to the driver's side window. He knocked once. The window came down 4 inches. Vernon Phelps was exactly as Wren had described him, pale, soft, and unremarkable in every deliberate way. The kind of face that was designed to be forgotten, the kind of presence that was engineered to slide past attention. His eyes moved from Cade's face to the cut to the patches and back to Cade's face, and in those 3 seconds, Cade watched him make the calculation and arrive at the wrong side of it. "I'm just parked," Phelps said. "I know who you are," Cade said. "Vernon Phelps, Red Bluff. You were in Tehama County 4 years ago, and a mother filed a complaint that never went anywhere." He watched the color leave Phelps' face, a slow draining like water going out of something. "The girl at this school who called me yesterday, that's my daughter." The window stopped moving. Phelps's hand was still on the button, frozen in the particular stillness of a man who has just realized that the situation he is in is not the situation he thought he was in. "You're going to want to listen carefully," Cade said, "because I'm only going to say this once, and I need you to understand every word." He rested one hand on the roof of the car, unhurried. "There are 2 men behind you right now that you haven't seen yet. There is a man at that school gate who has been there since 7 this morning. And there is a police report with your name on it sitting on a detective's desk in Reading." He let that settle. "You've been seen, not just by me. Every move you make from this point, every street you park on, every school you sit outside, there are people who know your name and your plate and your face." His voice stayed level, almost quiet, the way a man speaks when he doesn't need volume to make his meaning clear. And I know about Abigail Torrance. Something moved behind Phelps's eyes, something that wasn't fear, something worse. Not if you understand me. Phelps nodded, small and fast. Drive north, Kate said. Don't stop until you're past the county line. The window went up. The engine started. The black SUV pulled out of the space and moved down Maplewood without stopping at the light, without signaling, accelerating steadily until it turned north onto 5th and disappeared. Cade stood there for another moment, looking at the empty street, the empty bench, and the school fence with its chain links catching the gray morning light. Somewhere behind that fence, Wren was sitting in a classroom, listening to a teacher, not knowing that the black SUV had come back, not knowing that it had just left. He hoped for the last time, but he did not believe it, because he had seen something in Vernon Phelps's eyes when he'd said Abigail Torrance's name. Not the reaction of a man who was afraid of being caught. The reaction of a man who was afraid of being caught too soon. The reaction of someone who was not finished. And he had seen the nighttime traffic at Phelps' house. 3 vehicles, 10 minutes each. A system, an operation. Something larger than one man and one bench and one empty coffee cup. Cade got back on his bike and sat for a moment watching the street return to its ordinary rhythms. A mail truck, a woman with a stroller. 2 sparrows arguing over something on the sidewalk. The small, unremarkable machinery of a regular morning that had no idea what had just happened on it. He pulled out his phone and called Brannigan. I need you to pass something to the detective who's got the Phelps file, he said, and I need her to call me. He gave Brannigan the information about the nighttime visitors at the Red Bluff house. 3 vehicles, no plates on the van, regular intervals. Brannigan was quiet for a moment. That changes the picture. Yes, Cade said, it does. I'll flag it for Detective Calloway. She's been working connected cases across 3 counties. This is her territory. Good. Tell her to call me directly. He hung up and rode to the school gate where Boone was leaning against his softail with a gas station coffee. They stood together in the October cold and watched the empty street. Boone didn't ask what had happened at the car window. He looked at Cade's face and read the answer there the way men who have ridden together for 15 years read each other's faces fluently and without commentary. He'll be back, Boone said. Yeah. Different vehicle, different approach. Probably. Boone took a sip of his coffee and looked at the school fence where a teacher was leading a line of first graders from the playground to the side entrance, small feet shuffling, small voices chattering, entirely unaware. You know what gets me, Boone said. Not the man. There have always been men like that. What gets me is the systems that let them operate. 4 schools, 3 counties, 6 years, and 1 complaint that went nowhere. He crushed the empty cup in his hand. 1 mother who tried, and the system told her she was wrong. Cade didn't answer. He didn't need to. They stood together and watched the school and waited for the bell to ring, 2 men in leather cuts with road-hardened faces and the particular stillness of people who had made a decision and were prepared to follow it wherever it led. Cade had no illusions that the conversation at the car window had ended anything. A man like Vernon Phelps didn't stop because someone told him to stop. He paused, he regrouped, he found somewhere else to be patient. And he had people. The nighttime traffic proved that. This wasn't a solitary predator on a bench. This was something with roots. But Phelps knew his name now, knew his face and his cut, and the fact that there were men who had followed him north and watched his house while he slept. That mattered. It didn't solve everything, but it mattered. The bell rang at 3:15. Wren came out with the first wave of Kid's backpack on both shoulders, platinum blonde hair loose around her face, and she saw him immediately. Saw the Road King parked across the street, saw Cade standing at the fence, saw Boone beside him, and something in her walk changed. Not faster, more deliberate, like she was choosing each step. She came through the gate and stopped in front of him. She looked at his face and read it the way she read everything, carefully and completely. He came back, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, and he's gone past the county line. She absorbed that. Her eyes moved to the empty bench across the street, stayed there for a moment, then came back to him. But it's not over. He looked at his daughter, 10 years old, notebook in her backpack, pink phone in her pocket, standing in front of him with the steady eyes of someone who had inherited her mother's ability to see what was actually there instead of what she wanted to be there. No, he said, it's not. She nodded once. the nod of a person who had expected this answer and had already begun to prepare for what came next. "Okay," she said. "Then what do we do now?" Cade put his hand on her shoulder and they walked together to the bike. And he didn't answer because the answer was still forming, still taking shape in the space between what he knew and what he feared, between the empty bench and the nighttime visitors and the name Abigail Torrance, and the look in Vernon Phelps' eyes that had told him everything he needed to know about what kind of story this really was. It was not a story about a man on a bench. It was a story about something much worse, and his daughter had been the one to see it first. Nate called at 11:44 a.m. The same day Cade had stood at Vernon Phelps' car window and said the name Abigail Torrance and watched something move behind those pale, careful eyes. He passed the county line, kept going north, didn't stop, didn't turn. Cade was still parked on Maplewood when the call came in. He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment, looking at the empty bench, the empty street, and the school gate where Boone was leaning against his soft tail with a coffee from the bus station 2 blocks down. "He's gone," Nate said. For now. For now, those 2 words carried more weight than the rest of the sentence combined. "Come home," Cade said. "Both of you." 2 days passed. They were quiet days, the kind that settled into their own routine with a deceptive sense of resolution. Cade rode Wren to school each morning with Boone trailing behind. Colton kept his position at the end of the street through the first night and then returned to his apartment in Reading with a promise to come back at a word. The bench outside Jefferson Elementary remained empty. The black SUV did not appear on Maplewood or Crestwood or any of the connecting streets. The neighborhood returned to its ordinary patterns with the particular relief of a place that had briefly considered the possibility of danger and decided it was over. Cade did not share that assessment. On the evening of the second day, he sat on the porch after Wren had gone to bed and watched the street and thought about the 3 vehicles at Vernon Phelps' house in the middle of the night. A pickup truck, a gray sedan, a van with no plates, 10 minutes each. The rhythm of something organized, something practiced. His phone rang at 8:47 p.m. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize with a Reading area code. "Mr. Fielding, this is Detective Meredith Calloway. Officer Brannigan passed along your information about the activity at the Phelps residence." Her voice was direct and unhurried, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who had been building cases long enough to know that the building was the important part, not the speed. "I'd like to meet with you tomorrow morning if possible." "The diner on Route 44, Cade said. 8 o'clock. She arrived at 7:55. Cade was already in the booth by the window when she walked in, a woman in her early 50s with short gray hair and reading glasses pushed up on top of her head, and the particular posture of someone who carried the weight of open cases the way other people carried chronic back pain. Constantly aware of it, adjusted to it, unable to set it down. She ordered black coffee and didn't touch it. "I've been working the Phelps case for 2 years, she said, "across 3 counties. He's connected to incidents at 4 schools, different districts, different years. Every one of them follows the same pattern. Extended surveillance, bench or parking lot, never makes direct contact with the child, then he moves on." She paused and pushed her reading glasses further up on her head, a gesture Cade recognized as someone buying time to organize their next sentence. "The pattern is always the same. He arrives in a new area, finds a school, establishes a routine, the bench, the coffee cup, the quiet watching. He stays for days, sometimes weeks. He identifies children, and then he either moves on to another school or," she stopped. "Or he doesn't move on," Cade said. "Or he doesn't move on." "And the Torrance girl," Calloway looked at him for a moment, the look of a person deciding how much to share. "I believe Vernon Phelps was involved in Abigail Torrance's disappearance. I cannot prove it. Yet. The nighttime visitors at his house. That's what interested me most about your report. In 2 years of working this, I've always treated Phelps as a solo operator. Patient, methodical, careful. The traffic at his house suggests otherwise." She leaned forward slightly. "How many vehicles did your people see?" 3, Wham. "In 2 hours, none stayed more than 10 minutes. Descriptions? Pickup truck, gray sedan, and a van with no plates." Something shifted in Calloway's expression. Not surprise, recognition. An unmarked van showed up in the Torrance file, she said. A neighbor reported seeing one parked near the school the week before Abigail disappeared. We never found it. The coffee between them grew cold. The diner hummed with its morning business around them, Rosie moving between tables with the coffee pot, the clatter of plates from the kitchen, the bell above the door marking arrivals and departures that had nothing to do with missing children or men who sat on benches and watched. I need something from you, Mr. Fielding. Cade. Cade, I need you to stop what you're doing. He looked at her, the confrontation at his car window, the surveillance on his house, the men you have watching the school. I understand why you're doing it. As a parent, I understand completely. But you are going to destroy my case. Your case hasn't gone anywhere in 2 years. The words landed harder than he'd intended. Calloway absorbed them without flinching. My case hasn't gone anywhere because Vernon Phelps has never made a mistake. He's never touched a child in public. He's never left physical evidence. He's never done anything that rises to the level of criminal prosecution. She paused. But he is escalating. The nighttime traffic tells me that. Your daughter's report tells me that. And if I'm right about what he's building toward, I need him to keep moving toward it while I'm watching. Not while you're scaring him underground. Cade was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that had its own sound, the sound of a man fighting against his own instincts, with the rational understanding that the fight was necessary. If I back off, he said, and he gets near my daughter, he won't. I'll have people on it. Real surveillance. The kind that holds up in court. Your people didn't notice him for 3 days. My 10-year-old did. Calloway held his gaze. I know. That's why I'm here. She left a card on the table. He didn't pick it up immediately. He sat in the booth and drank the cold coffee and looked out the window at the October morning, doing its gray and ordinary thing, and thought about what it meant to trust a system he had spent his entire adult life operating outside of. Rosie came by and refilled his cup without being asked. That looked intense, she said. Rosie had known Cade since before Wren was born. She had known Laura. She was one of the few people in the world who could read Cade's face and comment on what she found there without receiving a look that discouraged further inquiry. It is, Cade said. Is Wren okay? She will be. Rosie looked at him for a moment the way she did when she was deciding whether to say the thing she was thinking or keep it to herself. She kept it to herself. She topped off his coffee and moved on. He called Boone from the parking lot and told him about Calloway. Boone listened without interrupting. So we back off. We pull back, not off. Cade looked at the diner behind him at the booth by the window where 2 cups of cold coffee sat on the table next to a detective's card. She's right about the way if we keep pushing, Phelps goes to ground and she loses her shot. And if she's wrong, then we do what we were going to do anyway. Boone was quiet for a moment. I'll tell the others. 3 days after the meeting at the diner, Cade was at home when the doorbell rang. He opened it to find a woman he had never seen before, mid-30s, wearing a blazer and carrying a clipboard and a laminated badge that identified her as Margaret Hollins from the County Department of Child and Family Services. Mr. Fielding, we've received a report regarding the welfare of your daughter, Wren Fielding. I'm here to conduct a standard assessment. Cade stood in the doorway and felt the floor shift beneath him. A report from whom? I'm not able to disclose the source. May I come in? He let her in because refusing would have made it worse, and he stood in his own kitchen and watched a stranger open cabinets and look in the refrigerator and write things on a clipboard while his mind worked through the implications of what was happening with the cold clarity of a man who had just been outmaneuvered by someone he had underestimated. Vernon Phelps had filed a complaint, not a criminal complaint, not harassment, something far more surgical. A welfare check, a concerned citizen's report about a child living with a man who rode with a motorcycle club, who had a record from his younger years, whose house showed signs of a lifestyle that a carefully worded report could make sound neglectful. Phelps hadn't just left when Cade told him to drive north. He'd counterattacked, and he'd chosen the weapon perfectly, the one thing that could hurt Cade more than anything Phelps could do with his own hands. The possibility that Wren could be taken away. Margaret Hollins was professional and thorough and not unkind. She looked at Wren's bedroom, which was clean and personal, with books on the shelf and a photograph of Laura on the nightstand that Kate had framed for her when she was 4. She looked at the kitchen, which was stocked and organized. She spoke with Wren briefly, and Wren answered her questions with the steady directness that Cade recognized as his daughter's version of being polite to someone she didn't trust. "Your home appears well-maintained," Holland said at the door. "I see no immediate concerns, but I will need to file my report, and there may be a follow-up visit." "There's something you should know," Cade said. He gave her Brannigan's name and the case number. "The man who filed this report is under investigation for stalking children. He's using your department as a weapon against me because I confronted him." Hollins wrote that down. Her expression didn't change, but something in the way she held her pen told him that she had heard this kind of thing before, and that she took it seriously even if she couldn't say so. "I'll include that in my report," she said and left. Cade closed the door and stood in the hallway for a full minute without moving. The house around him was quiet and clean and organized the way it had been since Laura died, because keeping it that way was one of the promises he'd made to himself when he realized he was going to raise a daughter alone, and that doing it well was going to require a different version of himself than the one he'd been for 35 years. He had changed for her. He had quit the worst of it, the runs that lasted weeks, the jobs that came without questions, and left without receipts, the version of the iron wolves that existed in police files and courtroom testimony. He had kept the brotherhood because the brotherhood was the truest thing he'd ever found outside of family, and because a man needed people who would show up at dusk without being told why. But the rest of it, the parts that would have made Margaret Hollins's clipboard a longer raid, those he had put away, the way you put away a weapon you no longer need but haven't quite decided to destroy. And now Vernon Phelps had reached through the system and found the exact pressure point that could take everything apart. Not through violence, not through confrontation, through a phone call and a clipboard and a woman who was just doing her job. He went to the kitchen where Wren was sitting at the table with her notebook open in front of her. "She was checking if you're a good ding," Wren said. "Yes." "Yeah, because of him." It wasn't a question. "Yeah." Wren looked at the front door, then back at Cade. Her expression was steady, but underneath the steadiness, Cade could see something he hadn't seen in her before. Not fear, anger, the particular cold anger of someone who has watched an injustice happen in their own home and has understood fully and clearly that the person responsible is not the woman with the clipboard, but the man who made the phone call that sent her. "He's smarter than I thought." "Yes," Cade said, "he is. But he made a mistake." Cade sat down across from her. "What mistake?" "He showed us he's scared of you. If he wasn't scared, he wouldn't need to send someone to take me away. He'd just wait." She tapped her pencil against the notebook. "Scared people do things that leave trails." Cade looked at his daughter, 10 years old, sitting at a kitchen table with a water glass and a notebook, in the particular expression of someone who was 3 steps ahead of the conversation and waiting for everyone else to catch up. "Your mother would have said the same thing," he said. It was the first time he had ever said that to her. The words came out before he could catch them, and once they were in the room, he let them stay. Wren's hand stopped moving. She looked at him, and for a moment the notebook and the pencil and the kitchen and the case all fell away, and it was just the two of them in the particular silence that existed between a father and a daughter who had spent 7 years building a language out of motorcycle rides and ham sandwiches, and the careful avoidance of the woman-shaped space between them. She noticed everything, same as you." Wren looked down at the notebook. She ran her thumb along the edge of the pages, and something moved across her face that Cade could not read, which was rare. "Okay," she said quietly, and went back to writing. He called Calloway that evening and told her about the welfare check. Her response was immediate. "I'll take care of it. I'll speak with DC directly and make sure the context is in the file." A pause. "This is consistent with what I've seen from Phelps. He uses systems against the people who threaten him. He's done it before." "Where?" "Tehama County. The mother who filed the original complaint 4 years ago. After she reported him, she received 2 visits from Child Services and a letter from a lawyer threatening a defamation suit. She dropped the complaint. And 6 months later, Abigail Torrance disappeared." "Yes." Cade stood on the porch in the dark, the phone against his ear, and felt the shape of this thing becoming clearer. Not just a man on a bench, a system, patient, deliberate, and designed to make anyone who noticed him regret it. "He's going to come back," Cade said. I know, and when he does, I'll be ready. So will I. Cade. I heard you. I'll stay back. But I'm not leaving my daughter unprotected. Calloway was quiet for a moment. I wouldn't expect you to. 2 weeks passed. They were weeks of waiting and surface-level normalcy that made Cade's skin itch. Wren went to school. She rode behind him on the Road King in the mornings and came home on the number 7 bus in the afternoons. And Boone was always somewhere in the vicinity of the school gate, present enough to be a deterrent and absent enough not to attract attention. The bench remained empty. Vernon Phelps' house in Red Bluff showed no activity. Calloway's team had it under intermittent surveillance, and the nighttime traffic had stopped entirely, which meant either that Phelps had been spooked into caution or that he had moved his operations somewhere Calloway couldn't see them. The days developed a rhythm that felt almost normal. Cade would ride Wren to School Park across the street for 10 minutes, then ride to the garage where he worked on other people's motorcycles for enough money to keep the house running. He'd taken over the business from a man named Earl who had retired to a trailer in Shasta County, and the work was steady enough, the kind of manual labor that occupied his hands and freed his mind, which was not always a good thing during weeks when his mind had too much to work with. He thought about Phelps constantly, about the welfare check and the way it had been deployed, the surgical precision of a man who understood that the most effective weapon against a parent was not physical threat, but the machinery of the state. About the Tehama County mother who had been visited twice by child services and threatened with a lawsuit until she stopped talking. About how many other parents had tried and been silenced, and about how many children had been left exposed because the people who noticed the danger had been punished for noticing it. He thought about Laura, too, more than usual. The weeks after Phelps' arrival had stirred something in the sediment of his grief that he normally kept settled and undisturbed. Laura would have known what to do with this. She would have made calls, filed records, written articles, built a paper trail so thick and so public that no system could have ignored it. She would have turned the machinery of attention toward Vernon Phelps and forced the light onto him until there was nowhere left for him to hide. But Laura was gone, and in her place was a 10-year-old girl who had inherited her mother's instincts without her mother's tools, and who was using a brown notebook and a pink phone and her own quiet courage to do what Laura would have done with a newsroom. Wren continued to write in her notebook. Cade didn't ask to see it. He trusted her process the way he trusted his own instincts, with the understanding that some things needed to develop on their own schedule and that pushing them produced worse results than patience. She went to school each day and came home each afternoon and sat at the kitchen table and did her homework and ate her dinner and went to bed at the same time she always had. And the normalcy of it was both reassuring and unsettling, the way the surface of a pond can be perfectly still while something moves beneath it. Rosie noticed. Cade took Wren to the diner on Route 44 on the second weekend, and Rosie brought their usual order and looked at Wren with a particular attention of a woman who had known this child since infancy and could read the weather of her moods with the accuracy of a barometer. "You're quiet today," Rosie said. "I'm thinking," Wren said. "About what?" Wren looked at Rosie for a moment, and Cade saw her making the calculation how much to share with whom and whether the sharing would help or hinder. It was a calculation he recognized because he made it himself constantly, the arithmetic of trust that defined the particular kind of life they lived. "About paying attention," Wren said, "about how most people don't do it." Rosie looked at Cade. He gave her nothing. She looked back at Wren. "Your mother used to say that," Rosie said quietly, "almost those exact words." Wren's hand tightened on her fork. She didn't say anything. She took a bite of pean and chewed it slowly and looked out the window, and Cade watched the information land in her and take root in the place where she was building the understanding of who her mother had been and who she herself was becoming. But on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the first day on the bench, Wren came home from school and set her backpack on the kitchen table and opened the notebook and turned it toward Cade without a word. He looked down at the page. She had been keeping records. Dates, times, and descriptions organized in columns with the neat precision of someone who had been watching carefully and documenting what she saw. But the subject was not Vernon Phelps. Dale Sutter, maintenance, brown hair 40s, badge number M-17, October 14th. Photographed the playground during second grade recess. Used personal phone, not school camera. Stood near the big tree by the fence. 4 photos. October 15th. Normal behavior. cleaned the gym floor, fixed the water fountain in B wing, did not take out personal phone during recess. October 16th stood near the east fence for 12 minutes during lunch, took 3 photos of children on the swings, put phone away when Mr. Eddington walked past. October 17th. After school, sat in his truck, red Ford plate 4RTG dash, something in the parking lot for 20 minutes, was texting, held the phone low like he didn't want anyone to see the screen, left at 4:12. October 19th, photographed a group of girls near the water fountain, pretended to be checking the drain when Mrs. Callahan walked by, went back to photographing after she left. October 20th, talked to Molly E. at recess, gave her a piece of candy. She showed him where her cubby is in the classroom. October 21st, I walked past his truck after school. His phone screen was open. He was sending photos. I couldn't see to who, but the photos were of children at the playground. I recognized Molly's butterfly shirt. Cade read it twice. The second time was slower. He felt the pages between his fingers and the weight of what they contained, and the understanding that his daughter had been conducting this investigation alone, day after day, writing in her notebook during breaks, and after school watching a man watch children, and recording everything with the methodical patience of a woman she had never met. Who is Dale Sutter? He started at the school 8 months ago, maintenance and custodial. He fixes things and mops the floors, and he's always around during recess. She paused. At first, I thought he was just doing his job. The school takes photos all the time for the website and the newsletter, but he uses his personal phone, and he only photographs certain kids. Which kids? The ones who are alone, the ones on the edges, the ones nobody's watching. She pulled the notebook toward her and flipped back a page. I mapped it. The children he photographs are always the ones furthest from the teachers, the ones who play by themselves near the fence, the ones whose parents pick them up late. She looked at him. The vulnerable ones. Cade felt the back of his neck go cold. And you've been tracking this since the day after you talked to Vernon Phelps at his car. I started paying more attention to who else was paying attention. She looked at him. Someone told Vernon Phelps which kids to watch. Someone inside the school who knew their names and their routines and which ones walked home alone. She said it the way she said, everything measured and steady, but beneath the steadiness was something harder. The particular fury of a child who has understood that the danger she faces is not random, but engineered, and that the engineering has components she has only begun to identify. Cade called Calloway that night. My daughter has been keeping records on a school maintenance worker named Dale Sutter. He's been photographing children during recess with his personal phone. She has dates, times, and descriptions. Calloway was quiet for several seconds. The kind of quiet that meant the information was landing in a place she had prepared for it. Sutter, she said. Dale Sutter. You know the name? I know the name. Give me 24 hours. The 24 hours became 48, and when Calloway called back, her voice had changed. Not louder, tighter. The voice of a woman who had found the piece she'd been looking for and was holding it very carefully. Dale Sutter and Vernon Phelps shared an address in Bakersfield 5 years ago, a rental property on the south side. They lived together for 14 months before Sutter moved north and Phelps moved to Red Bluff. She let that settle. They're working together. Sutter gets inside. He gets access, builds trust, learns routines. He photographs. He provides intelligence. Phelps operates from the outside, the surveillance, the pattern, mapping the selection. Selection, Cade said. The word tasted wrong in his mouth. Of targets, yes. And there are others, the nighttime visitors. We're identifying them now. Your daughter's documentation gave us the link between Sutter and Phelps. Without it, we might not have connected them for months. A pause. She did something remarkable. She did what her mother would have done. I'd like to see the notebook, the original pages in Wren's handwriting, chain of evidence. You'll have it tomorrow. He hung up and stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Wren, who was sitting at the table working on a math assignment as though the world were exactly what it appeared to be. Pencil moving across the page. The focused quiet of a child doing ordinary things. But the notebook was beside her. It was always beside her now. Calloway says they're connected, Cade said. Sutter and Phelps, they lived together in Bakersfield. Wren didn't look up. I know. You know, I mean, I figured the way Sutter photographs those specific kids, the ones near the fence, the ones at the edges, those are the same kids Vernon Phelps was watching from the bench. It wasn't a coincidence. She set her pencil down and met his eyes. Sutter is the one who tells Vernon which children to look at. Vernon decides which one to follow. They've been doing this for a long time, Dad, at a lot of schools. She said it with the calm of someone stating a conclusion she had reached days ago and had been waiting for the adults to arrive at. And Cade stood in the doorway of his own kitchen and looked at his 10-year-old daughter and felt two things simultaneously. A pride so fierce it hurt, and a fear that went deeper than anything Vernon Phelps had put in him, the fear of what this knowledge was doing to her, what it was building in the spaces between the facts she'd written in that notebook, the particular kind of understanding that once acquired could never be given back. Wren, yeah, you can stop. You've done enough. Calloway has the notebook. She'll take it from here. Wren looked at him for a long moment. The gray October light from the kitchen window falling across her face, catching the platinum of her hair, and the particular set of her jaw that came from Laura, always from Laura. Mom wouldn't have stopped. The words landed in the kitchen like something dropped from a height. Not loud, heavy. Mom was an adult, Kate said. Mom was a reporter who followed stories until they ended. You told me that. You told me she believed that seeing something and walking away was worse than not seeing it at all. She paused. I see it, Dad. I can't unsee it. No, he said. You can't. He sat down across from her. The kitchen was quiet. The faucet dripped. Outside, the November evening was settling in the light, failing the street going through its daily transition from day to dark. In the window, their reflections looked back at them, a man and a girl sitting across a table, mirrored and reversed, the same posture, the same set of the jaw, the same way of holding still when the conversation mattered. Your mother was 28 when she started investigating the story that won her the award, Kate said. She had a degree in a newsroom and an editor who backed her up. She had sources and legal protections and the ability to walk away if it got too dangerous. She didn't walk away. No, she didn't. And I was proud of her every day for that. He paused. But she was an adult making an adult's choice. You're 10. The choice isn't the same. The choice is exactly the same. Someone is hurting children. I can help stop it. Walking away doesn't make the hurting stop. It just means I don't have to see it anymore. The words landed in the kitchen with the weight of something that had been building for a long time, longer than 3 weeks, longer than the man on the bench in the black SUV and the notebook entries. This had been building since the day Laura died and left a daughter who inherited her courage without anyone to teach her what to do with it. Cade looked at Wren and saw for the first time with complete clarity the woman his daughter was becoming. So we do this together. You see something, you write it down, and you bring it to me. Not to Calloway, not to anyone else. To me first, always. Always. And you don't approach Sutter. You don't talk to him. You don't let him know you've noticed anything. I haven't. He has no idea. Good. Keep it that way. She picked up her pencil and went back to her math. Cade sat across from her and watched her work the scratch of pencil on paper, the small movements of concentration, and felt the weight of the thing they were carrying together shift and redistribute between them. Not lighter, just shared. Calloway moved quickly after that. She ran Sutter's background and found what Wren had already suspected. A clean record, no priors, no red flags on the employment screening that Jefferson Elementary had conducted when they hired him 8 months ago. He was invisible in the way that Vernon Phelps was invisible by design, by the careful curation of a life that was engineered to pass inspection. But the Bakersfield address connected them, and Calloway's team began pulling the threads. She found a third connection, a man named Grady Tolliver, 44, who had lived at the same Bakersfield address for 6 months before Sutter and Phelps. Tolliver had a prior arrest, indecent exposure near a school in Modesto, charges dropped. He was now living in Chico, 2 hours north, and Tolliver drove a gray sedan, the nighttime visitors. 3 vehicles, a pickup, a sedan, and a van. Calloway now had names for 2 of them. The van remained unidentified, but the pattern was taking shape, the outline of something that had been operating in the spaces between jurisdictions, in the gaps between school districts, in the dead zones where complaints were filed and forgotten and children disappeared, and nobody connected the dots because nobody was looking at all the dots at once. Nobody except a detective who had been working the case for 2 years, and a 10-year-old girl with a notebook. This is the first time in 2 years that I've been able to establish connections between these individuals, Calloway told Kate over the phone. The Bakersfield address is the key. It gives us a common point of origin. It tells us this isn't coincidence, it's coordination. How do they operate? From what I can piece together, they rotate. Sutter goes into a school, establishes himself as staff builds access. Phelps runs external surveillance, identifies targets. Tolliver handles logistics. And the van, whoever drives it, handles transport. Transport. The word came out of Cade's mouth like something that tasted wrong. Yes, we believe that's how Abigail Torrance was moved. Cade stood on the porch and felt the November cold pressing against him, and understood with perfect clarity that the thing he was dealing with was not a man on a bench, but a machine, and that the machine had been running for years, and that it had consumed at least one child, and that it was parked right now outside his daughter's school in the form of a maintenance worker with a mop and a personal phone and a badge that said M17. Calloway asked Cade to leave Sutter in place. The request went against everything in his body. If we pull him now, Phelps and Tolliver disappear, she said. Sutter is the connection. He's the only one inside a school right now. He's the only one who can lead us to the rest of the network. If we arrest him, the others scatter. They change names, change states, find new schools, and we start from zero. He's inside my daughter's school. I know. I have an officer in plain clothes on the grounds during school hours, another in the parking lot. Sutter doesn't know he's being watched. My daughter is watching him. Your daughter is the reason we know about him at all. Calloway's voice was careful but firm. I'm asking you to trust me, not the system, not the department, me personally. I have been working this case for 2 years because I believe that Abigail Torrance is still alive and that finding the people who took her is the only way to bring her home. Your daughter gave me the break I needed. Don't take it away now. Cade trusted her. Not fully, not the way he trusted Boone or Colton or the men who had pulled into his street at dusk, but enough to hold his position, enough to wait, enough to understand that sometimes the hardest form of protection was the kind that required standing still. He told Boone. Boone's reaction was predictable. You're letting a man who photographs children stay inside Wren's school. Calloway's got people on him, and Wren knows to stay away. Wren is 10. Wren is the one who found him. She's more careful than any of us. Boone was quiet for a long time. I don't like it. Neither do I, but Calloway's right. If we pull Sutter, we lose the network. We get one man with a phone, the rest disappear. And Abigail Torrance stays gone. Yeah, Boone exhaled. How long? Until the festival, October 30th. Calloway thinks that's when Phelps will make his move. And if he doesn't, then we find another way. But my gut says he will. Vernon Phelps stayed in Red Bluff. Calloway's surveillance showed him maintaining his routine groceries gas station, the local library, where he spent hours on a computer in the back corner. She obtained a warrant for his internet activity and found what she expected and wished she hadn't. She did not share the details with Cade. She didn't need to. The look on her face when she called him told him enough. We're building the case, she said. It's getting stronger every day. But I need a triggering event, something that moves Phelps from surveillance to action, something I can catch on camera and use in court. He'll come back, Cade said. Yes, and when he does, everything needs to be in place. 2 days later, the school announced its annual fall festival. October 30th, open campus, hundreds of parents, children, and community members on the grounds. Wren saw the flyer on the bull seating board outside the main office and stood in front of it for a long time. That evening, she brought it up at dinner. The fall festival, she said. Open gates, hundreds of strangers on campus, no one checking IDs. Cade set down his fork. If I were Vernon Phelps, Wren said, that's when I'd come back. She said it without drama, without the particular emphasis that might have made it sound rehearsed. She said it the way she said everything in her notebook, as an observation, a fact recorded, a pattern identified. Cade looked at her across the kitchen table, and in the silence between them, he heard the sound of the next thing coming, the thing he had been waiting for and dreading in equal measure, the thing that would bring Vernon Phelps back into the open and force the end of this story one way or another. I think you're right, he said. He called Calloway, the school's fall festival, October 30th, open campus. Calloway was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. That's it, she said. That's the event. Wren figured it out. Of course she did. They spent the next week preparing. Calloway assembled her team plainclothes officers who would be positioned at every entrance and along the perimeter, equipped with photographs of Vernon Phelps and Grady Tolliver and physical descriptions of every vehicle associated with the case. She coordinated with the school through Principal Eddington, who had moved past his initial caution and into a quiet, focused cooperation that surprised Cade. Boone organized the brotherhood, not on campus, on the surrounding streets, at intersections and parking lots. A network of riders positioned to see anyone approaching from any direction and to follow without being seen. Colton took the north approach. Silas took the south. Nate was on the west near the bus depot. The rest spread out across the grid in a pattern that covered every street within a half-mile radius of Jefferson Elementary. Sutter remained at the school. He continued his routine, mopping floors, fixing faucets, taking photographs of children on his personal phone during recess, and sending them to a number that Calloway's team had traced to a burner registered to an address that didn't exist. Wren continued to write in her notebook. On the morning of October 29th, the day before the festival, she came downstairs and found Cade at the kitchen table with a map of the school grounds spread out in front of him. "Can I see?" she asked. He pushed it toward her. She studied it for several minutes, tracing the fences and gates and open areas with her finger the way Laura used to trace maps of city blocks when she was working a story, finding the angles and the sight lines and the places where things could happen without being seen. "The east fence," Wren said, "near the equipment shed. That's where Sutter takes most of his photos. It's the only part of the playground that's not visible from the main office windows." Cade looked at where she was pointing. She was right. A blind spot. Obvious in retrospect, invisible until someone pointed it out. And that's where the second-grade girl plays, the one Vernon waved at through the fence. She looked up at him. "That's where he'll go." Cade picked up the phone and called Calloway. October 30th arrived under a sky the color of old pewter. Wren woke before the alarm. She lay in bed for several minutes looking at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house in the early morning. The kitchen faucet dripping the way it did when the temperature dropped below 50. The creak of the floorboard outside her door that meant Cade had already checked on her and gone downstairs. The distant sound of his coffee maker, which was old and loud, and which he refused to replace because Laura had bought it. She got up and dressed in her bright red t-shirt and black pants and white sneakers and stood in front of the mirror for a moment, not looking at herself so much as looking past herself at the room behind her and the photograph of her mother on the nightstand and the notebook on the desk and the pink phone in its cracked case sitting beside it. She picked up the notebook and put it in her backpack. She picked up the phone and put it in her pocket. She went downstairs. Cade was at the kitchen table. He had the map of the school grounds in front of him again, though she suspected he had memorized it days ago and was looking at it now out of the particular habit of a man who prepared for things by going over them one more time than necessary. "Morning," he said. "Morning." She sat down and poured cereal and ate it without tasting it and watched him over the rim of the bowl. He was wearing his cut, the leather vest with the Iron Wolves patches and the road captain tab, and she knew what that meant. He wasn't hiding today. He wasn't blending in. He was being exactly what he was, and he was making sure that anyone who saw him would know it. "Boone and the others are already in position," he said, "every street within half a mile. Calloway, her team is on campus, plain clothes. You won't see them, but they'll be there." Wren nodded. She finished her cereal and put the bowl in the sink and came back to the table. "Dad, yeah. If I see him today, I'm not going to be scared." Cade looked at her for a long moment. Not the way a father looks at a child he's worried about. The way one person looks at another when they recognize something in them that is not new, but is being seen clearly for the first time. "I know," he said. They rode to school together. Just the two of them, this time the Road King moving through the early morning streets with Wren behind him, her arms around his waist, chin tucked against the cold October air. The school was already being set up when they arrived. Folding tables in the parking lot, paper streamers on the chain-link fence, a banner above the main entrance that read, Jefferson Elementary Fall Festival in orange and black letters. Cade parked across the street and walked Ren to the gate. He stood there and looked at the grounds and saw what anyone would see: a school getting ready for a community event. Balloons, a cotton candy machine being wheeled into position. Teachers in costume ghosts and witches, and one particularly committed vampire. The ordinary cheerful disorder of a school preparing to open its doors to the neighborhood. He also saw what most people wouldn't. The man in the gray jacket near the north entrance who was drinking coffee and reading a newspaper, and whose eyes moved in a pattern that had nothing to do with reading. The woman by the parking lot who was pretending to check her phone and who was wearing an earpiece. The groundskeeper near the east fence who was not in fact the regular groundskeeper. Calloway's people, in position, visible unless you knew what to look for. Cade looked at the east fence, at the equipment shed, and the blind spot Ren had identified on the map. There was someone there too, a woman in a volunteer t-shirt arranging boxes. She had clear sight lines in every direction. He scanned the surrounding streets. At the intersection to the north, he could see the front fender of Colton's bike parked between two delivery vans with a clear view of the north parking lot approach. To the south, Silas's Sportster was visible in the gas station lot across from the school's south entrance. Nate was somewhere to the west near the bus depot. He couldn't see him, but he didn't need to. Nate was where he said he'd be. He always was. Boone was parked on Maplewood 2 blocks east. Close enough to reach the school on foot in under a minute. Far enough that his soft tail wouldn't draw attention from someone approaching from the highway. The net was in place. Everything they had built over the past 3 weeks, the surveillance and the documentation and the careful patient waiting, it all came down to this: an October morning, a school festival, and the belief held by a detective and a biker and a 10-year-old girl that Vernon Phelps would not be able to stay away. He looked at Ren. "You see them," she said. "Yeah." "Good." She shifted her backpack on her shoulders. "I'll be inside." "Ren," she turned back. "You see him, you come finds me. That's it. You don't approach, you don't confront, you find me." "I know." "Say it." "I see him, I come find you." She held his gaze. "I promise." She went through the gate. Cade watched her cross the yard, red t-shirt bright against the gray morning platinum hair, catching what little light the October sky was offering. And he felt the particular weight of watching someone he loved walk into a situation he couldn't fully control. He went back to his bike and rode to the intersection at 5th and Maplewood, where he could see the school entrance in the full length of both streets, and he sat and waited. The festival began at 10. By 10:30, the campus was full. Parents with strollers, grandparents in folding chairs, children running between booths with faces painted like cats and superheroes, and things that defied classification. The cotton candy machine was doing steady business. A local band was setting up on the small stage near the gymnasium, and the sound of a guitar being tuned competed with the laughter and shouting and general happy chaos of a community event in full swing. Dale Sutter was working the grounds. Ren saw him near the gymnasium, carrying a folding table with the unhurried efficiency of a man doing exactly what his job description required. He set it down, adjusted the legs, and moved on. Normal. Unremarkable. She watched him from the corner of the art building where she was standing with her notebook open, pretending to sketch the decorations. She had a clear view of the east fence, the equipment shed, and the section of playground where the second-grade classes had their recess. The blind spot. At 10:47, Sutter walked past the east fence. He paused near the equipment shed, took out his phone, and typed something. 3 seconds. Then he put the phone away and kept walking. Ren wrote it down. 10:47, Sutter at east fence. Texted, 3 seconds. She kept watching. At 11:15, a second-grade girl with brown pigtails wandered away from the face-painting booth and walked toward the swings near the east fence. She was alone. The teacher monitoring the playground was 20 meters away, engaged in conversation with a parent her back to the fence. Ren recognized the girl. Molly Eddington, the principal's niece, the same girl who had waved back at Vernon Phelps through the fence 3 weeks ago. Sutter appeared near the equipment shed again. He took out his phone. This time Ren was close enough to see the screen. He took a photograph of Molly at the swings. One photo quick, the phone held at waist height. Then he texted again. Ren closed her notebook and walked across the yard toward the main gate. She didn't run. She didn't look back at Sutter. She moved with a deliberate calm of someone who understood that the next few minutes mattered more than any minutes she had lived through before, and that panic was not going to help. She found Kate at the intersection. He was still on the Road King engine off watching the school entrance. She walked up to him and said, "Sutter just photographed Molly Eddington at the east fence and sent a text. If Vernon is coming, he's coming now." Cade was off the bike before she finished the sentence. He called Calloway on the walk across the street. 4 words. Sutter made contact, east fence. Calloway's response was immediate. "Copy. Team is moving. Stay at the main entrance." Cade didn't stay at the main entrance. He went through the gate and positioned himself near the art building where he could see the east fence and the equipment shed and the stretch of playground where Molly Eddington was still swinging alone, unaware her pigtails flying behind her in the cold October air. Wren was beside him. He hadn't told her to follow, but he hadn't told her to stay, and she had made the calculation on her own. "There," she said. Cade looked where she was looking. The north parking lot visible through the gaps in the fence. A white sedan, not the black SUV, was pulling into a space near the far end. It stopped. The engine cut. The door opened. Vernon Phelps stepped out. He looked different. The khaki jacket was gone, replaced by a dark blue windbreaker. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead and reading glasses that Wren was certain he didn't need. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder, a small black one, the kind that any parent or volunteer might carry. But his eyes were the same. Wren saw them through the fence 20 meters away, and she recognized them instantly. The flat mechanical sweep, the measuring quality, the way they moved across the playground like security cameras back and forth scanning, selecting. His eyes don't match his mouth, she had written in her notebook on the second day. And they still didn't. They never would. "That's him," she said. Cade was already on the phone. "North parking lot, white sedan, blue windbreaker baseball cap. He's on foot heading toward the east fence. Calloway, we see him. Hold your position. Let him come to the fence." The next 3 minutes were the longest of Wren Fielding's life. She stood next to her father behind the art building and watched Vernon Phelps walk across the parking lot toward the north entrance of the school grounds. He moved without hurry. The confident, unhurried walk of a man who had done this before, who had mapped this school from a bench in a car window in a bus stop, and who knew exactly where the blind spots were and exactly how to use them. He came through the entrance. Nobody stopped him. It was an open campus day. Hundreds of strangers were walking in and out. He was invisible in the crowd, just another adult in a windbreaker with a backpack smiling at a child who passed, nodding at a teacher, blending into the ordinary human fabric of a school festival, like something that had always been there. He walked past the gymnasium, past the cotton candy machine, past the face painting booth where Molly Eddington had been sitting 20 minutes ago. He kept walking, moving east, and Wren watched his trajectory and understood with a certainty that sat like a cold stone in her chest that he was heading exactly where she had told Kate he would go. The east fence, the equipment shed, the blind spot. And Molly was still on the swings. Wren looked at her father. Cade was watching Phelps, his body absolutely still. His jaw set in the particular way that meant he was holding himself in place by force of will. She could see what it was costing him. The need to move to intercept, to put himself between Phelps and the playground, fighting against Calloway's instruction to hold position and let the man come close enough to do something that could be recorded and used in court. Wren made a decision. She stepped away from the art building and walked across the yard toward the swings. Cade reached for her arm, but she was already out of reach, and he couldn't call out without alerting Phelps. He watched her go with the particular helplessness of a man who understood that his daughter was doing something he couldn't stop, and that stopping her would have been wrong. Wren walked to the swings. She moved at a normal pace, the pace of a girl heading to the playground. Nothing urgent, nothing unusual. She reached the swings and sat down in the one next to Molly's. "Hey, Molly, Sima." "Molly," she said. Molly looked over. She was 7 years old with brown pigtails and a face painted like a butterfly, in the particular cheerful openness of a child who had not yet learned to be cautious about the world. "Hi," Molly said. "Are you on the swings too?" "Yeah, hey, have you seen the cotton candy machine? They're giving out free bags." Molly's eyes went wide. "Free? Free, but I think they might run out. We should go now." Molly jumped off the swing before Wren finished the sentence. They walked together toward the main yard, away from the east fence, away from the equipment shed, away from the blind spot where Vernon Phelps was now approaching from the north side with his backpack on his shoulder and his flat eyes scanning the playground for the girl with the brown pigtails who had been right there, right on the swings 30 seconds ago. She was gone. Wren walked Molly to the cotton candy booth and bought her a bag with the $3 she had in her pocket and watched Molly's face light up with the uncomplicated happiness of a child receiving sugar, and she stood there beside her and felt something settle in her chest that she would not have words for until much later. Behind her, she heard it happen, not loudly, not dramatically. Calloway's team moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had rehearsed this exact sequence. Two plainclothes officers converged on Vernon Phelps from opposite directions near the equipment shed. A third stepped out from behind the shed itself. They did not raise their voices. They did not draw weapons. They simply closed the space around him like water filling a depression in sand naturally and completely. Phelps saw them coming. Wren turned in time to see his face, to see the moment of recognition pass across it, the instant when the careful architecture of his invisibility collapsed, and he understood that he had been seen not by a 10-year-old girl on a bench, not by a biker in a leather cut, but by everyone, by a system that had for once been paying attention. He didn't run. He stood very still near the equipment shed with his backpack on his shoulder and his baseball cap pulled low, and when the first officer reached him and said his name, he simply nodded. The arrest was quiet. Calloway had insisted on that. No sirens, no shouting, no scene that would traumatize 300 children and their families. The officers moved Phelps away from the playground and toward the parking lot with the practiced efficiency of people who had rehearsed this movement a dozen times and who understood that the arrest itself was only the beginning. In the parking lot, Calloway was waiting. She stood next to her unmarked car with her badge visible and her reading glasses on top of her head and watched Vernon Phelps being brought toward her with the expression of a woman who had been waiting 2 years for this moment and who was feeling not triumph but the particular grim satisfaction of a job that was finally being done. She nodded at the officers. They placed Phelps in the back of the car. She leaned down and looked at him through the window for a long moment, and Cade, watching from 20 meters away, saw something pass between them, a recognition, the detective and the suspect meeting each other's eyes, with the understanding that one of them had been building a case and the other had been building a life designed to evade it, and that the case had won. Inside the school, Simultaneous and Coordinated, another team approached Dale Sutter. He was in the maintenance closet off the gymnasium hallway, holding his phone. The phone with the photographs, the phone with the text to the burner number. He looked up when the door opened and saw 2 officers and a woman with a badge, and his face went through the same sequence Phelps's had gone through: recognition, calculation, and the particular stillness of someone arriving at the end of something they had believed would never end. Sutter's arrest was also quiet. He was taken through the gymnasium's back entrance, out of sight of the festival, and placed in a separate vehicle. His phone was seized. His locker was sealed. His truck in the parking lot was secured for forensic examination. The festival continued around both arrests like water flowing past stones in a stream. The cotton candy machine kept spinning. The band kept playing. 300 people celebrated a school tradition without knowing that the tradition had just been saved from something that would have destroyed it. Wren didn't see Sutter being taken. She heard about it later. What she saw was Vernon Phelps being walked across the parking lot toward the unmarked cars, his hands behind his back, his baseball cap falling off as he was guided into the back seat. She saw his face through the car window as the door closed, and for one moment their eyes met. His eyes were the same, flat, measuring, unchanged. But Wren's were different now. She held his gaze through the glass, steady and unflinching, and in the 3 seconds before the car pulled away, she let him see him, not scared, not uncertain, not the girl at the laundromat wall with the pink phone pressed against her chest. Then the car turned the corner and he was gone. Cade was beside her. She hadn't heard him approach. He put his hand on her shoulder and she leaned into it for a moment, just a moment, the way she had on the first day at the laundromat wall, and then straightened up. "You moved Molly," he said. "She was in the blind spot." He was 20 seconds away from her. "You were supposed to come find me." "There wasn't time." She looked up at him. "You know there wasn't time." He looked at her for a long moment. The festival was continuing around them, oddly and probably most of the attendees unaware that anything had happened at all. The cotton candy machine was still running. The band was playing a song that Wren didn't recognize. Molly Eddington was sitting on a bench near the main entrance, eating her cotton candy, with the concentrated attention of a child for whom cotton candy was the most important thing in the world. Yeah, Kate said, I know. Calloway found them 20 minutes later. She was standing by the unmarked cars in the parking lot speaking into her phone with the particular intensity of someone coordinating multiple things simultaneously. When she finished the call, she walked over to where Cade and Wren were standing near the gate. We have both of them, she said, Phelps and Sutter, and we have Sutter's phone. The text, the photographs, everything. She looked at Wren. The backpack Phelps was carrying, it contained zip ties, a roll of duct tape, and a change of children's clothing. The words fell into the space between them like stones into deep water. Cade's hand tightened on Wren's shoulder. Wren didn't move. She stood very still and absorbed the information, the way she absorbed all information completely, and without flinching, and filed it in the place where she kept the things that were true and terrible, and that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. He wasn't just watching today, Wren said. No, Calloway said. He wasn't. The silence that followed had a weight to it that went beyond the three of them, beyond the parking lot, in the festival, in the school. It was the weight of what had almost happened, and hadn't the weight of a 20-second margin between a girl on a swing and a man with zip ties in his backpack, the weight of a cracked pink phone and a notebook in a 10-year-old who had decided 3 weeks ago that seeing something and walking away was not something she was capable of doing. Calloway looked at Cade. We're executing search warrants on Phelps's residence in Red Bluff and Tolliver's location in Chico right now. And I've passed the case to the FBI's Regional Task Force. This is bigger than 3 counties. How much bigger? We'll know soon, but based on what's on Sutter's phone, there are at least 4 other individuals involved across 4 states. The communications go back 3 years. They use coded language rotating burner phones in a system of addresses that took my forensic tech less than an hour to crack, because Vernon Phelps, for all his patience, was not as careful with his digital footprint as he was with his physical one. She paused. And there are references in the communications to other children, previous targets, including references consistent with the Torrance case. Cade was very still. Abigail Torrance. I can't confirm details yet, but yes, we believe the evidence will lead us to her, or to what happened to her. Wren looked up. She was 7 when she disappeared. She'd be 11 now. Calloway looked at her with an expression that Wren would not fully understand until years later, the expression of a woman who had been doing this work for a very long time and who recognized in a child something that she had been looking for in adults for her entire career, the willingness to look at difficult things directly, the refusal to turn away. Yes, Calloway said, she would be. She reached into her jacket and took out a card and handed it to Wren. Not to Cade, to Wren. I may need you to testify, she said. Not now, when the case goes to court. Your notebook, your observations, they're going to be part of the evidentiary foundation. You should know that, and you should know that what you did matters. Not in the way people say things matter when they want to make children feel good, in the way that changes outcomes. Wren took the card and looked at it and put it in her pocket next to the pink phone. Okay, she said. Calloway looked at Cade. Take her home. I'll be in touch. They walked to the parking lot. Boone was there. He had left his position on Maplewood when Cade had called him, and he was standing next to the Road King with his arms crossed and his gray beard catching the October light and the particular expression of a man who had been waiting to exhale and was finally doing so. He looked at Wren. You good, yeah? He nodded. Then he looked at Cade, and something passed between them that was not spoken and did not need to be. 15 years of riding together. 15 years of difficult situations and the particular trust that builds between men who have faced them side by side. It was all in that look. I'll call the others, Boone said. They should know. Yeah, Cade said. They should. 2 weeks later, Calloway called. Cade was on the porch when the phone rang. November had settled in over the town, the October gray giving way to the harder gray of early winter, the kind of cold that arrived without drama and stayed without apology. He answered on the second ring. We found her, Calloway said. Abigail Torrance. She's alive. The words arrived and Cade sat down on the porch step, which was something he did not normally do during phone calls, and pressed the phone against his ear and closed his eyes. Where a house in rural Oregon, one of the network members, a man named Dwight Felder, had been keeping her for 3.5 years. She's at a hospital now. She's physically unharmed. A pause, the kind of pause that carried the weight of everything that physically unharmed didn't cover. She asked for her mother. Cade opened his eyes. The street in front of him was doing what streets did in November. A neighbor raking leaves, a dog walking itself. The ordinary afternoon business of a world that was in this particular moment doing something it didn't always do, being just. The evidence from Phelps's devices and Sutter's phone was the key, Calloway said. The communications contained coordinates in a coded address system. Once we broke the code, which took our forensic team less than a day, the house in Oregon came up immediately. It was listed under a false name registered to a shell, LLC, that Felder had created using documents he'd purchased from another member of the network. She paused again. Without your daughter's documentation, we wouldn't have connected Sutter to Phelps in time. Without that connection, we wouldn't have the network. Without the network, we wouldn't have found Abigail. How is she? Calloway was quiet for a moment. She's 11 years old. She's been in a house in rural Oregon for 3.5 years. She doesn't know what year it is. She doesn't know that people have been looking for her. Another pause. But she remembered her mother's name. She said it was the first thing she said when the agents came through the door. Cade sat on the porch step and felt something move through him, that he did not have a name for something that was not relief and not grief and not anger, but all of them braided together into a single cord that ran from his chest to the soles of his feet. The mother in Tehama County, he said, the one who filed the complaint 4 years ago. She's been notified. She's on her way to Oregon now. Good. Cade, the total arrest count across 4 states is 6 individuals. The FBI task force is still executing warrants. There may be more. But Abigail is home. Abigail is going home. Yes. Does Wren know? Not yet. I thought you should tell her. He hung up and sat on the porch step for another minute, watching the street. The oak tree at the end where Colton had parked his bike on the first night was bare now, its branches dark against the gray sky. The spot on the curb where 8 motorcycles had lined up at dusk was empty and quiet. The driveway where the Road King sat chrome, catching the weak November light. He went inside. Wren was at the kitchen table. She was doing homework, actually doing it pencil moving across the page, with the focused concentration of a child who had decided to return to ordinary things. The notebook was on the shelf above the desk, now not beside her. She had put it there the day after the festival, and she hadn't taken it down since. She looked up when he came in. That was Calloway, she said. Not a question. Yeah. Something happened. Something good. She set down her pencil. They found Abigail Torrance. She's alive. She's at a hospital. She's going home. Wren was quiet for a long time. Her hands were flat on the table and her eyes were on the window, and the November light was falling across her face the way the October light had fallen across it a month ago when she had stood at the corner of the art building and watched Vernon Phelps walk toward the east fence and made the decision that had changed everything. She was 7, Wren said. She's 11 now. 3.5 years. Yeah, she was quiet again. And then something happened that Cade had seen only 3 times in the 7 years since Laura died. Wren's eyes filled with tears and she didn't try to stop them. She sat at the kitchen table and cried, and it was the kind of crying that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with relief, the relief of knowing that the thing she had been carrying, the weight of a 7-year-old girl who had vanished from a school where a man had sat on a bench and watched the weight of that, was being set down now. Not all the way, but enough. Cade came around the table and put his arms around her, and she pressed her face against his chest and held on, and he held her, and the kitchen was quiet except for the sound of her breathing and the drip of the faucet and the old coffee maker ticking as it cooled. After a while, she pulled back and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and looked at him. Dad. Yeah. I want to go to Rosie's. He took her to Rosie's. The diner on Route 44 was the same as it always was, unchanged by seasons or circumstances or the particular events that had reshaped everything around it. The coffee was still bad, the pie was still good, The woman behind the counter still knew their order before they sat down, and the booth by the window still had the same small tear in the vinyl that Wren had been picking at since she was 5. Wren ordered cherry pie. Kate ordered coffee. Rosie brought both without being asked and stood at the table for a moment looking at Wren with an expression that suggested she knew something had happened and was waiting to be told. "The girl they were looking for," Wren said. "They found her." Rosie's hand went briefly to her chest. Alive. Alive. Rosie looked at Cade, then back at Wren, and something passed between the three of them that didn't need words. It was the particular communion of people who had known each other long enough and through enough to understand that some moments required only presence, not commentary. Rosie refilled Cade's coffee and left. Wren ate her pie slowly, deliberately, the way she did when she was thinking about something that wasn't finished yet, but was getting closer. "Can I ask you something?" "Yeah." "Was I brave?" Cade looked at her across the table, the cherry pie between them, the bad coffee in his cup, the window showing the November afternoon, doing its gray and quiet thing outside, the leaves on the sidewalk and the cars on the road, and the unremarkable machinery of a regular day in a small town in Northern California. "You were the bravest person in the room," he said. "Every room." She looked at him for a moment. Then something in her face changed, not a smile exactly, but something close to it, something that lived in the same neighborhood as a smile, and that would get there eventually. "Okay," she said. They rode home in the early evening light, the Road King moving through the familiar streets with Wren behind him, her arms around his waist, chin tucked against the November cold. She held on a little tighter than usual, and he could feel her breathing against his back, steady and deliberate, the breathing of someone who had been through something and was coming out the other side of it. They turned onto their street. The oak tree was bare now, its branches dark against the gray sky. The curb where the motorcycles had lined up was empty. The driveway where they'd parked 100 times was just a driveway, and the house behind it was just a house, the kind that existed on 1,000 streets, in 1,000 towns, doing what houses did, holding the people inside them together. Cade pulled in and cut the engine. They sat there for a moment in the quiet, the way they always did, the small pause between the road and the rest of everything, and then Wren climbed off and stood on the driveway and looked at the end of the street. It was different now. Not searching, not checking. The look of someone who had already found what she was looking for and was simply acknowledging that the finding had changed her. "He's not coming back," she said. "No," Cade said. "He's not." She looked at him. "But you're going to check anyway." "Yeah." "Good." She picked up her backpack from the rear seat and headed for the front door. At the steps, she paused and turned back. "Dad." "Yeah." "The phone you gave me, with your number inside the case." "Yeah. I'm glad you did that." He looked at her standing on the front step, the bright red t-shirt, too small now, the one she wouldn't give up. The platinum blonde hair, Laura's hair, catching the last of the November light. The steady eyes that had seen a man on a bench and recognized the wrongness of his smile, and picked up a phone and called the one number she trusted and set in motion a chain of events that had brought a missing girl home. "Me too," he said. She went inside. The deadbolt turned. Cade sat on his bike for a moment longer, watching the street in the early dark. Then he pulled out his phone and called Boone. "It's over," he said. "They found the girl." Boone was quiet for a moment. "Alive. Alive." Another pause. The particular silence of a man processing good news that he hadn't been sure he'd ever hear. "I'll tell the others." "Yeah." "Cade." "Yeah. She's something your kid." Cade looked at the front door of his house, at the light coming on in the kitchen window, at the shadow moving behind the curtain. That was his daughter going to the table where she'd sit and do homework and drink water and be ordinary and remarkable and entirely herself. "Yeah," he said. "She is." He went inside. The kitchen was warm. The faucet was dripping. The old coffee maker was in its place on the counter where it had been since Laura bought it, and Wren was at the table with a glass of water and her homework open and her pencil moving across the page. The notebook was on the shelf. The phone was in her pocket. The house did what houses were supposed to do. It held them together.